My name is Helen, I'm 61 years old. And my son-in-law screamed ridiculous old woman at me in front of 200 people at my daughter's wedding. Before I tell you how my daughter canceled the entire wedding just moments later, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The photographer's flash was still a bright spot in my vision. It had just captured the perfect image. My daughter, my only child Chloe, kissing her new husband, Ethan. They were radiant under the soft lights of the reception hall in Austin. The very picture of happiness. My heart felt like it was going to burst right out of my chest. This was the moment I had dreamed of for years. I was standing right in front of their head table, clutching a small, blue velvet box in my hand. My hands were trembling, a mixture of nerves and pure joy. "Mom!" Chloe had exclaimed just a second before, her face lighting up when she saw me approaching. "Come here." But as I stepped forward, Ethan's smile vanished. It didn't just fade, it was replaced by a look of sheer annoyance, as if my presence was a fly buzzing around his head. I tried to ignore it. This day wasn't about him, not really. It was about my little girl. "I have something for you, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. I opened the small box. Inside, nestled on the satin lining, were a pair of simple pearl earrings. They weren't flashy, but they glowed with a soft, timeless light. "They were your grandmother's," I began, my voice cracking. "She gave them to me on my wedding day, and I want you to have them now." Chloe's eyes filled with tears of pure emotion. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, reaching out a hand to touch them. "They're beautiful." It was a perfect private moment in the middle of a crowded room. A thread of love connecting 3 generations of women. And then Ethan shattered it. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was ugly and full of scorn. "Seriously, Helen?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Some old pearls." I was floored. The words hit me like a splash of ice water. Chloe looked at him, confused. "Ethan, what are you talking about? They were my grandma's. They mean everything to me." But he wasn't listening to her. His cold eyes were fixed on me. "We're trying to have a modern wedding here, not dig up relics from the past," he sneered. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. I tried to keep my composure for Chloe's sake. "I just wanted to give my daughter her gift, Ethan. It's a special moment." That's when he exploded. His face turned a blotchy red. His voice rose from a sneer to a full-blown yell, silencing the chatter at the nearby tables. "A special moment? You're always trying to make everything about you, with your little dramas and your sentimental nonsense." The air went out of my lungs. It felt like a punch to the gut. The room started to spin. And then, with a cruelty that I will never forget, he leaned forward, his voice booming across the sudden silence. He shouted so everyone could hear. "Just behave and don't ruin the party, you ridiculous old woman." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The music seemed to fade away. The clinking of glasses stopped. Every single head in that part of the room turned towards us. I was the spectacle. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with morbid curiosity. My face was on fire. My hands were shaking so violently that the small velvet box slipped from my grasp. It hit the floor with a soft thud. One of the pearl earrings popped out and rolled under the table, lost in the darkness. I looked at my daughter. Her beautiful smile was gone, replaced by a mask of utter disbelief and horror. Her eyes darted from my devastated face to the twisted, angry face of her new husband. In that moment, the entire world seemed to stop. But then something happened that I never ever expected. The look of horror on Chloe's face shifted. It was like watching a storm cloud roll in, fast and dark. The shock turned into a cold, icy fury that I had never seen in her before. She dropped Ethan's hand as if it were a hot coal. Without a single word, she stood up and turned. She didn't walk toward me to comfort me. She didn't run away. She started walking with a purpose that chilled me to the bone, straight toward the small stage where the band had stopped playing, their instruments hanging silently. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing? Get back here!" Ethan hissed behind her, scrambling to his feet and reaching for her arm. She shook him off with a surprising strength, never once looking back. She moved through the stunned crowd like a queen, her white dress trailing behind her. She walked up the 2 steps to the stage, her back straight, her head held high. Her hand reached out for the microphone, still sitting on its stand. To understand how a dream can curdle into a nightmare so quickly, you have to see how perfect it was when it began. That morning I woke up in my quiet suburban home in Austin, and the world felt golden. The Texas sun was already streaming through the kitchen window, promising a warm, beautiful day. The air smelled of coffee and the hairspray Chloe had been using, a scent I hadn't smelled in that house for years. It was the smell of happiness. My daughter, my whole world, was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-eaten piece of toast on her plate. She wasn't just happy. She was glowing, lit from within. At 28, she was a smart, kind, successful woman, and seeing her on her wedding day, well, it was everything. I raised her on my own. I was a single mom, a school librarian, and every penny I ever earned, every extra shift I ever took, was for her. I poured my life into that girl, making sure she had everything she needed. Building up her college fund was my life's mission, and seeing her graduate from UT was one of the proudest days of my life. This day, her wedding day, was meant to top it. "You're staring, Mom," she said, her laugh filling the small kitchen. "I can't help it," I told her, my voice already thick. "You're just perfect." And she was. Everything about the day felt perfect. The man she was marrying, Ethan, was, on the surface, every mother's dream for her daughter. He was a young, ambitious entrepreneur, the kind of man who wore expensive suits and had a handshake that could crush rocks. He was confident, charming, and Chloe was absolutely smitten with him. She looked at him like he hung the moon. But even then, on that perfect morning, there was a little thorn in my heart. A tiny nagging feeling of unease that I couldn't quite name. It had been there ever since I first met him a year ago. He had this way of talking at you, not to you. The first time we met, he spent 20 minutes listing his business achievements, barely asking me a single question about myself. I felt less like a person and more like a piece of furniture in the background of Chloe's life, a part of her history he had to politely acknowledge before moving on. I told myself it was just my overprotective motherly instinct. I'd raised her alone for so long, maybe I was just scared of letting go. I convinced myself that I was being silly, that my own lonely life was making me cynical. My God, I should have trusted my gut from the very first second. We helped her into her dress, a beautiful creation of lace and silk. My sister Carol was there, fussing over the veil, her eyes shining with tears. We were a team, the three of us. As I fastened the last pearl button on the back of Chloe's dress, she looked at our reflection in the mirror. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, "for everything." I hugged her tight. "It was all worth it to see you this happy, sweetheart." The drive to the church was a blur of happy chatter. Chloe was practically bouncing in her seat. She was so sure, so absolutely certain that this was the beginning of her forever. I wanted it to be true more than anything in the world. The church was magnificent, filled with lilies and the soft glow of stained glass windows. Our friends and family filled the pews. I took my seat in the front row, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And then the music started. When I saw Chloe walking down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, my brother, a wave of emotion so powerful washed over me that I had to bite my lip to keep from sobbing aloud. She was breathtaking. I prayed in that moment, a silent, desperate prayer that all my worries about Ethan were just the foolish fears of an old woman. She reached the altar. She stood beside Ethan. He turned to her, and his smile was dazzling. He looked like a prince in a fairy tale. I allowed myself a small, hopeful sigh of relief. But even in that sacred moment, as the minister began to speak, Ethan did something small, something almost no one else would have noticed. He subtly adjusted his cufflinks, and for a split second, his eyes flickered out over the crowd, a quick, sweeping glance. It wasn't the look of a man lost in the love of his bride. It was the look of a man assessing his audience, checking to see if everyone was admiring him. It sent a chill right down my spine. The reception was held at a beautiful venue called the Hillside Terrace, an elegant place with panoramic windows overlooking the rolling Texas hill country. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden glow. It was supposed to be magical. Everything looked perfect. The tables were adorned with stunning floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and champagne glasses clinked together. But I couldn't relax. My eyes kept finding Ethan. I watched him work the room, accepting congratulations with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I saw the possessive way his hand rested on the small of Chloe's back, as if he were staking a claim. I remembered all the little things, the red flags I had painted white for my daughter's sake. There was the time we all went out to a nice dinner. He had summoned the waiter not with a polite nod, but by snapping his fingers, a sharp, ugly sound that made me flinch. Chloe had just squeezed his arm and laughed it off. "Oh, Mom, he's just impatient. He's a man who knows what he wants." Then there was the afternoon I was excitedly telling them about a new children's literacy program I was volunteering for at the library. I was so passionate about it. In the middle of my story, Ethan had cut me off, turning to Chloe to talk about a stock market deal. Later, when I looked hurt, he'd patted my arm condescendingly. "That's a really cute way to kill time, Helen," he'd said, as if my life's passion was a childish hobby. Chloe had defended him then, too. "He doesn't mean it like that, Mom. He just lives in a very high-stakes world." The worst was the toast. At every wedding, the groom's speech is a moment of heartfelt thanks. But Ethan's toast was a monument to himself. He stood up, glass held high, and spoke for 10 minutes. 8 of those minutes were about his latest business venture, his plans for expansion, and his own incredible journey to success. He mentioned Chloe almost as an afterthought. "And of course," he'd said, "I'm thrilled to have Chloe by my side, a beautiful and supportive asset as I continue to build my empire." An asset. Not his partner, not his love, not his soulmate. An asset. He thanked his own parents profusely. He thanked his business partners. He never once mentioned me. Not a single word of thanks for the woman who had raised the asset he was so proud to acquire. The feeling of being erased was so profound it felt physical. My sister Carol, sitting beside me at the table, slipped her hand over mine and squeezed hard. Her eyes met mine, and in that silent look, she told me everything I needed to know. She saw it too. She had kept her mouth shut for the same reason I had, for Chloe. I know some of you watching this have been in that exact spot, haven't you? You see something in your child's partner that sets off alarm bells, but you're terrified to say anything. You don't want to be the meddling mother-in-law. You don't want to risk pushing your child away. So you bite your tongue, you force a smile, and you pray that you're wrong. Please keep watching, and you'll see why my silence was a mistake that almost cost my daughter her future. I tried to shake it off. I stood up and mingled, forcing smiles and making small talk. I danced with my brother. I hugged old friends. I kept telling myself, "This is Chloe's day. Don't ruin it. Be happy for her." Later, it was time for the formal family photos on the terrace. The photographer was a cheerful young woman who was trying to arrange everyone. "Okay, mother of the bride, right next to your beautiful daughter," she chirped. I stepped into place next to Chloe, wrapping an arm around her waist. For a moment, leaning against my daughter, smelling the perfume in her hair, everything felt right again. I was beaming, my face aching from smiling so much. But as the photographer was adjusting her lens, Ethan did something that proved his contempt wasn't just careless. It was deliberate. And it was cruel. The photographer was saying, "Okay, everyone squeeze in tight. Big smiles." I was standing proudly next to Chloe, my hand on her back. The soft, pale blue dress I'd spent weeks searching for felt perfect for the occasion. It was elegant, understated. It was the dress of a proud mother of the bride. Ethan was on the other side of Chloe, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. "Let me just get in here," he said, maneuvering himself into the group. As he passed in front of me to get to his spot, he stumbled just a little. It was barely a jolt, but it was enough. A splash of red wine arched through the air and landed directly on the front of my light blue dress. It wasn't a huge stain, but it was dark, ugly, and impossible to miss, right on my stomach. "Oh my God, Helen, I am so sorry," he exclaimed, his voice laced with an insincere, theatrical apology. He didn't look sorry at all. In fact, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, a tiny spark of satisfaction. He then added with a little chuckle, "Guess you were standing in the way." The implication was clear. It was my fault. Before I could even react, his mother, Margaret, a woman as cold and polished as the marble floors in her mansion, bustled forward. She was holding a cocktail napkin as if it were a surgical instrument. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Helen," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the group to hear. "It's just a little spill. Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill on the children's special day. She dabbed uselessly at the stain, making it smudge and spread. Okay, let's get this shot, the photographer called out. Unaware of the little drama that had just unfolded, I was flustered trying to blot the stain, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. While I was bent over, distracted and mortified, the photographer started snapping pictures. Click, click, click. By the time I straightened up, red-faced and with a giant purple splotch on my dress, the main family photos were done. I wasn't in them. I had been neatly, efficiently, and publicly sidelined. I looked over at Ethan. He was smiling broadly for the camera, his arm securely around Chloe. He caught my eye for a split second and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. That's when I knew. It wasn't an accident. It was a power play. A calculated move to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to show everyone there that I was insignificant. He was marking his territory, and his territory included erasing me from my own daughter's life, starting with her wedding photos. It was a small act, but it was packed with so much malice. It was a declaration of war. And like a fool, I didn't see it. I thought it was just him being a jerk. I thought the worst he could do was stain my dress and ruin a few pictures. I had no idea that was just the opening shot. I thought that was the worst of it. I was so wrong. After that little incident, I retreated to my table, feeling small and foolish. Carol saw the look on my face. That little punk did that on purpose, she whispered fiercely. It's fine, I mumbled, though it was anything but fine. I decided right then and there that I wouldn't let him win. I wouldn't let him sour this day completely. I still had my gift for Chloe, the one thing that was about our family, our history, our love. An inheritance of the heart that he couldn't touch. I would give it to her, and I would do it in front of him. I wanted to show him that there were things, connections, that his money couldn't buy and his arrogance couldn't break. It was a decision that would lead directly to the final disaster. The band started playing again, and Chloe and Ethan took to the floor for their first dance. They looked beautiful, moving under the soft lights. But even then I could see Ethan's jaw was tight, his movements precise and practiced, more like a performance than a moment of intimacy. Chloe, my sweet girl, was just lost in the moment, her face buried in his shoulder. When the dance was over, they returned to their table, surrounded by laughing friends. The photographer was there, capturing every moment. That's when I knew I had to do it. With my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, I stood up. I smoothed down my dress, trying to hide the ugly wine stain. I took the small velvet box out of my purse. Each step I took toward that head table felt like a mile. The closer I got, the louder the buzzing in my ears became. It was a mix of love for my daughter and a deep irrational fear of my new son-in-law. But then Chloe saw me approaching, and her face lit up with that brilliant smile, and it gave me the courage to keep going. I reached their table just as the photographer was saying, "One more. A kiss for the camera." They obliged, and the flash went off, capturing a perfect picture of a lie. I waited patiently. When they broke apart, Chloe saw me standing there. "Mom," she said, her arms outstretched for a hug. I clung to her, burying my face in her hair, breathing in her perfume. "You are so beautiful, my darling girl," I whispered, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Just breathtaking." "Thank you, Mom. For everything," she whispered back, her eyes shining. Over her shoulder I could see Ethan. He was watching us, his smile thin and tight, his eyes impatient. He looked like a CEO waiting for a boring meeting to end. I ignored him. I pulled back a little and held out the box. "I have something for you," I said, my voice softer now. Her eyes, full of happy curiosity, watched as my trembling hands opened the lid. Inside, the pearl earrings my mother had given me glowed softly. "They were Grandma's," I explained, my voice catching. "She gave them to me on my wedding day. And I want you to have them now. So you'll always carry the love of the women in this family with you." Chloe's face crumpled with pure emotion. "Oh, Mom," she breathed, reaching out to gently touch one of the pearls. "They're perfect." I don't know what to say. It was our moment. A sacred, invisible thread connecting me, my daughter, and my own beloved mother across time. A moment of pure, unconditional love in the middle of a loud, chaotic party. And then with one brutal swing, Ethan took an axe to that thread. "Seriously, Helen?" he scoffed, the sound cutting through our bubble. Some old pearls? I thought you were giving her something valuable. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I was frozen. Chloe stared at him. Ethan, what are you saying? They're from my grandmother. They mean everything to me. But he wasn't looking at her. His gaze was locked on me, cold and filled with a contempt he didn't even bother to hide. We're trying to have a good time here, Estella, he said, using my first name like an insult. Can't you see you're interrupting? Go back to your table and leave us alone. He said it like he was shooing away a dog. The pain was sharp, a physical blow. I tried to stand up for myself for the moment. I just wanted to give my daughter. He cut me off. Give her what? A reminder of your family's broke past? Is that it? A little piece of the inheritance you don't have. And then he completely lost it. His face flushed a dark, ugly red. His voice rose, a furious bellow that silenced the tables around us. You are always trying to be the center of attention, with your little dramas and your cheap sentimental garbage. Enough. Stop making a fool of yourself. The words rained down on me, each one a stone. My lungs refused to work. And then for the grand finale, with a cruelty I will carry with me to my grave. He leaned in, his voice ringing out in the stunned silence that was spreading like a virus through the room. He yelled right in my face. Just behave and don't ruin the party, you ridiculous old woman. In the dead quiet that followed, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I looked at my daughter. Her face, which had been a canvas of joy just moments before, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. And in that silence as I stood there, stripped bare and humiliated in front of everyone I knew, I saw her eyes change. The shock gave way to something else, something I had never seen in my sweet, gentle daughter. It was a look of absolute terrifying fury. Time froze. The insult hung in the air, thick and toxic. My first instinct was to shrink, to disappear, to simply evaporate under the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. My cheeks were on fire. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. The world became a blurry tunnel, and at the end of it was Ethan's sneering, triumphant face. But then I saw Chloe. She wasn't looking at me with pity. She wasn't crying. The disbelief on her face had been replaced by a flash of lightning. Her soft features hardened into a mask of cold, resolute anger. Her lips, which had been smiling for photos moments before, were now a thin, hard line. She ripped her hand out of Ethan's grasp as if his touch had burned her. And then she started walking. She walked right past him, right past the head table. She walked with a purpose that was terrifying. Her steps were silent but heavy on the polished dance floor. The stunned guests parted for her like she was the Red Sea. Chloe, what the hell do you think you're doing? Get back here right now. Don't you dare make a scene. Ethan hissed, stumbling after her, trying to grab her arm. She shook him off without even looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the stage. She climbed the 2 steps, her movements graceful but powerful. With a steady hand, she took the microphone from its stand. A brief, screeching feedback cut through the silence, making everyone flinch. It was a sound as ugly as the situation itself. She turned to face the crowd, her white dress glowing under the stage lights. She was a bride, yes, but she looked like a general about to address her troops. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but when she spoke, her voice, though trembling with unshed tears, rang out with terrifying clarity. Good evening, everyone, she began, her gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned faces. I know you all came here tonight to celebrate a union. A beginning. She paused, and the silence was so complete you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I'm afraid the celebration is over. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Ethan stood at the foot of the stage, his face a cocktail of fury and panic. Chloe, get down from there. You're crazy. She ignored him completely, as if he didn't exist. Her eyes found mine in the crowd for just a second, and then she looked back at her guests. The woman that man just humiliated, she said, her voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow. The woman he just called a ridiculous old woman in front of all of you is my mother. The tears finally started to roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of righteous rage. She is the woman who gave me life. The woman who worked 2 jobs my entire childhood, so I could have a good education and a chance at a better life. The woman who sold her own mother's jewelry, her only real inheritance, to help me with the down payment on my first apartment. She is the woman who taught me everything I know about dignity, about respect, and about unconditional love. She took a shaky breath, the sound echoing through the speakers. She then turned her head and looked directly at Ethan. There was no love left in her eyes. There was only profound, bottomless disappointment. "And I will not marry," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "I will not spend one more day of my life with a man who is incapable of respecting the most important person in the world to me. A man who thinks cruelty is strength." She turned back to the audience, her decision made, absolute and irrevocable. "So, with all of you as my witnesses, I am announcing that this wedding is cancelled." The collective gasp in the room was like the wind being knocked out of 200 people at once. Ethan was frozen, his face going from red with rage to sheet white with shock. Chloe didn't wait for a reaction. She let the microphone fall from her hand. It hit the stage with a loud, definitive thud. Then she walked down the steps, through the crowd that was now staring at her with a mixture of shock and awe. She walked straight to me. She held out her hand. "Let's go home, Mom," she whispered. I took her hand. It was steady. Mine was still trembling. Without a single look back, without a care for the chaos and the wreckage she was leaving behind, my daughter led me toward the exit, away from the disaster that was supposed to have been the happiest day of her life. Walking out of that ballroom was the longest walk of my life. Every step felt like wading through thick mud. The silence of the guests was a physical wall around us. I could feel their eyes on my back like hundreds of tiny needles. Chloe held my hand with a grip that anchored me to reality, the only thing keeping me from crumbling right there on the floor. Her back was ramrod straight, her chin held high. She looked like a queen abandoning a kingdom that had betrayed her. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were fixed on the grand glass doors at the end of the hall. As we walked, people literally moved out of our way, creating a path for our escape. I heard whispers. I heard the unmistakable click and whir of someone recording on their phone. It was the soundtrack to a social catastrophe unfolding in real time. We had just reached the lobby when a voice, guttural and full of rage, roared her name. "Chloe!" We both turned. It was Ethan running toward us, his perfect groom's facade completely shattered. His face was a mask of pure fury. His parents, Margaret and George, scurried behind him, their faces pale with horror and shame. "You dare walk out of here," he commanded, grabbing Chloe's arm, his fingers digging in. "You get back inside and you fix this mess." Chloe yanked her arm away with a violent tug. "There is nothing to fix, Ethan," she said, her voice as cold and hard as steel. "And don't you ever put your hands on me again." The mask was gone. The charming, successful entrepreneur was gone. All that was left was a cruel, desperate man. His wild eyes landed on me. "You!" he spat, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "This is all your fault. You were always in her ear, poisoning her against me. You never wanted me in this family." "Enough!" Chloe shouted, stepping between us, a protective lioness. "Don't you dare speak to her. The only person to blame here is you. You and your disgusting arrogance. You and your inability to respect anyone but yourself." Margaret, Ethan's mother, who had always been distant but polite, stepped forward. "Chloe dear, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Let's not be hasty. It's just a misunderstanding. The nerves of the wedding." "No, Margaret," Chloe interrupted, her tone respectful but firm. "It was not a misunderstanding. I heard exactly what he said. More importantly, my mother heard what he said. And in our family, that's a line you don't cross. Ever." In that unbearable moment of tension, a familiar figure pushed through the small, horrified crowd that had gathered in the lobby. It was my sister, Carol. She had my purse in one hand and my car keys in the other. "Let's go, Helen," she said, her voice calm and commanding, completely ignoring Ethan and his parents. She put a protective arm around my shoulders. "The car's right out front." She guided us toward the doors. "We are not finished here," Ethan screamed, his voice echoing off the marble floors. No one answered him. We stepped out into the warm Texas night. The cool air was a relief on my burning skin. The valet, his eyes wide with shock, already had my car waiting. Carol helped me into the passenger seat as Chloe slid behind the wheel. Through the windshield, I saw Ethan standing in the brightly lit doorway of the ballroom. He was just a silhouette, a powerless figure watching his future, or what he thought was his future, drive away. Chloe started the engine and hit the gas, leaving behind the ballroom, the guests, the flowers, the music, and the monumental wreck that had been her wedding. I looked in the rearview mirror as we pulled away, and I saw Margaret, Ethan's mother, standing on the curb. She wasn't watching us. She was looking down, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, her thumbs moving furiously across the screen. At the time, I didn't understand what she was doing. I would find out soon enough that she was firing the next shot in a war I didn't even know we were in. The silence in the car was heavier and more suffocating than all the shouting in the ballroom. I thought the worst was over. But I didn't know that at home. A different kind of battle was just about to begin. The drive home was a silent movie of streetlights and blurred colors. The only sound was the quiet hum of the engine and the muffled sobs that I could no longer hold back. Chloe drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She didn't say a word. She just drove. When we pulled into our driveway, the familiar lights of my little house felt like a lighthouse in the middle of a raging sea. It was safety. It was home. Chloe turned off the engine, and we just sat there for a long moment in the darkness, the weight of what had just happened finally crashing down on us. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The familiar space that was usually my sanctuary felt alien, like a stage set after the play has ended in disaster. Chloe stood in the middle of the living room, a ghostly figure in her magnificent white dress. She looked like a beautiful broken statue. Carol, ever the practical one, went straight to the kitchen. "I'm making tea," she announced, her voice a comforting anchor in the surreal silence. "Chamomile. We're all going to need it." I walked over to my daughter, my heart a tangled mess of gratitude, pride, and a devastating, crushing guilt. Was this my fault? If I had just stayed at my table. "Chloe, sweetheart." I started, but my voice choked in my throat. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on her reflection in the dark window, where an exhausted bride stared back at her. "I need to get this off," she whispered, her voice barely audible, gesturing to the dress. The zipper was tiny, adorned with a long row of delicate fake pearl buttons. It was a cruel irony. I nodded, and with hands that still shook, I began to undo them one by one. Each button I freed felt like I was loosening the knot in my own throat. The heavy satin of the dress was like a suit of armor that had protected her during the battle, but now it was a prison. As my fingers worked, I felt her shoulders begin to tremble. At first, it was just a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. Then a choked sob escaped her lips. By the time I unfastened the last button, her whole body was shaking with the force of a grief she had held back for hours. The beautiful dress, the symbol of all her hopes and dreams, slithered to the floor. It pooled around her feet, a shimmering puddle of silk and broken promises. She stood there in her slip, vulnerable and shivering. And then finally she turned to face me. Her face, streaked with mascara, was a mess of anguish. "I ruined everything, Mom," she wept, her voice breaking. "My wedding, my life. Everything's ruined." That's when the guilt I felt was washed away by a fierce, tidal wave of protective love. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, cradling her head against my chest just like I did when she was a little girl with a scraped knee. "No, my love. No," I said, stroking her hair as her tears soaked the front of my dress. "You didn't ruin anything. You saved me. You stood up for me. What you did tonight. It was the bravest, most loving thing I have ever seen in my entire life." She shook her head against my chest, her sobs intensifying. "But I loved him, Mom," she cried, the words tearing my heart to pieces. "I really thought I loved him." The strong woman who had faced down 200 people had finally crumbled. And now it was my turn to hold her up. "I know, baby, I know. And it hurts. It hurts like hell," I whispered. "But love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't belittle. What you saw tonight, that cruelty, that's not love. That's a cage. And you just flew out of it." We stood there like that for a long time, clinging to each other in the middle of the living room, with the dead dream of her wedding dress lying at our feet. Carol came back in with a tray, 3 steaming mugs of tea, filling the room with the calming scent of chamomile and honey. She guided us to the sofa and wrapped Chloe in a warm blanket. For the first time all night, I saw the sheer bone-deep exhaustion on my daughter's face. Her eyes were swollen and red. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her completely drained. We drank the tea in silence. It was Carol who spoke first. "You did the right thing, sweetie," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You saved yourself from a lifetime of misery. A man who does that to your mother in public, just imagine what he would have done to you in private." Chloe nodded slowly, staring into her mug. And just as a fragile sense of peace began to settle over us, a harsh, buzzing sound shattered it. It was a phone, vibrating insistently on the coffee table. All three of us stared at the illuminated screen as if it were a bomb. The name flashing on it was the last one any of us wanted to see. Ethan. We sat frozen, but the buzzing didn't stop. Then Carol's phone, sitting next to it, lit up with a notification. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read. Her face went pale. "Helen," she said, her voice suddenly tight with alarm. "You need to see this. It's on the Austin Neighbors Connect Facebook group." Carol handed me her phone, her hand trembling slightly. My heart pounded against my ribs as I took it. On the screen was a post from our neighborhood's private Facebook group, a place usually reserved for posts about lost dogs and garage sales. But this was different. This was a public execution. The post was by Margaret, Ethan's mother. And it was long. I started reading and I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a masterpiece of lies. A carefully constructed narrative that painted me as the villain of the entire story. "Dear friends and neighbors," it began. "I am writing this with a heart broken for my son, Ethan, and his lovely bride, Chloe. Many of you have heard rumors about what happened at their wedding tonight, and I feel it is my duty to share the truth." The truth. My hand started to shake. She went on to describe me as a difficult and overbearing mother-in-law, someone who was clearly jealous of her daughter's happiness and had never approved of Ethan. She claimed I was threatened by Chloe starting a new life with a successful man. Then she got to the part about the gift. She wrote that I had chosen a deliberately inappropriate moment during the photographer's session to make a scene. She twisted the story completely. She wrote that Ethan had simply, quietly and politely, asked me if we could have that special moment later in private, and that I, in response, had flown into a rage, accusing him of disrespecting my family. The most insidious lie was how she described his final, cruel shout. She wrote, "My poor son, under immense stress from the wedding and provoked by Helen's outburst, simply asked her to calm down so as not to ruin the party." Perhaps his tone was firm, but his words have been twisted into something ugly and untrue. She ended the post with a plea for sympathy. "Our family is devastated. A beautiful day was ruined by one person's need for attention. Please keep Ethan in your prayers as he navigates this shocking and undeserved heartbreak." It was brilliant in its wickedness. She had taken every fact and warped it, recasting me as a hysterical, attention-seeking monster and her son as the innocent victim. Chloe read the post over my shoulder, her breath catching in her throat. "She's lying," she whispered, her voice hollow. "She's lying about everything." And then we saw the comments. They were already flooding in, mostly from Margaret's wealthy friends from the country club. "I knew it. Helen always seemed a bit much," one wrote. "That poor boy. Ethan is a saint to have put up with her for so long. Chloe needs to apologize to her husband and get away from her toxic mother. Disgusting behavior from an old woman who can't stand to see her daughter happy." Each comment was a fresh stab in the heart. They were turning me into a caricature, a monster. They were validating every cruel thing Ethan had said and done. The public humiliation at the wedding was one thing, but this felt worse. This was a calculated campaign to destroy my reputation, to isolate my daughter, to rewrite history in real time. "They're making you the villain, Mom," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. She sank back into the sofa cushions, bringing a hand to her mouth. For a moment I thought she was going to be sick. She just stared into space, her face ashen. "Now everyone thinks." She couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of it, the permanence of those lies on the internet, hit her like a physical blow. I felt a surge of fury so intense it almost choked me. They wouldn't get away with this. But how do you fight a lie that's spreading like wildfire? We felt completely and utterly alone, trapped in my living room while a digital mob was gathering outside, armed with Margaret's poisonous words. Just as Chloe looked like she was about to shatter completely, her own phone, which she'd left on the sofa, started buzzing. And it didn't stop. A relentless stream of notifications lit up the screen. We both assumed it was more hate, more messages from Ethan's friends, more public shaming. But as the screen flashed again and again, we saw the notifications weren't from Facebook. They were tags, mentions, and direct messages. And they were coming from a completely unexpected source. Chloe stared at her phone as if it were a snake, buzzing and rattling on the couch cushion. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't look." "Let me," Carol said, her voice firm. She reached over and picked up the phone, her eyes scanning the screen. Her expression shifted from worried to confused, and then to a slow dawning surprise. "Well, I'll be," she murmured. "Chloe, you need to see this." She handed the phone to Chloe. With a trembling finger, Chloe tapped on a notification. It took her back to Margaret's poisonous Facebook post. But the landscape of the comments section had dramatically changed. Buried under the initial wave of support for Ethan, a new comment had appeared. It was from Chloe's younger cousin Jessica, who had been at the wedding. And attached to her comment was a video file. Jessica had written, "This is not what happened, Mrs. Davison, and I have proof. I was recording the first dance, and I never stopped recording. My heart stopped." Chloe pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone. The quality wasn't great, but the audio was crystal clear. We watched the scene unfold again, this time from an outsider's perspective. We saw me approach the table. We saw Chloe's joy. And then we heard it. We heard Ethan's condescending laugh. We heard his cruel words. "Some old pearls." We heard him escalate, his voice getting louder and nastier. And then we heard the shout, clear as a bell, ringing out in the sudden silence. "You ridiculous old woman." The video didn't stop there. It captured my devastated face. It captured Chloe's transformation from shock to fury. It captured her powerful walk to the stage. And it captured her entire speech, every single defiant word. The video ended with the thud of the microphone hitting the floor and the two of us walking, hand in hand, toward the exit. It was irrefutable. It was the truth. And it had changed everything. The comments section had exploded. The tide had turned so fast it was breathtaking. "My God, Margaret, you are a liar," one neighbor wrote. "I heard him scream at her with my own ears." Another chimed in. "Wow. Just wow. To humiliate your mother-in-law, and then have your own mother lie about it online? That family is pure trash." But it wasn't just anger. A wave of support, massive and overwhelming, was crashing in. Women from all over Austin, women we didn't even know, were rallying to Chloe's side. That wasn't a bridezilla. That was a lioness protecting her mother. "Chloe, you are my hero. I wish I'd had your courage 30 years ago. God bless you for standing up for what's right. This isn't a scandal. This is a lesson in dignity." That young woman just saved herself from a lifetime of misery. Margaret's original post was being buried under an avalanche of truth and solidarity. Her friends had gone silent. Chloe scrolled and scrolled, her tears starting to fall again. But this time they weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming, staggering relief. She wasn't a joke. She wasn't a crazy runaway bride. She was a hero. The private messages started pouring in too. Dozens of them. Women sharing their own stories of emotionally abusive partners, of nightmarish in-laws, of moments they wished they had been as brave as she was. "Thank you," one woman wrote. "Watching your video gave me the strength to finally call a divorce lawyer." The shame that had been suffocating us began to dissipate, replaced by a strange and powerful sense of connection. We weren't alone. The support from all those strangers gave us the strength to breathe again. But the real battle, the one that truly mattered, was the one that was about to happen right there in my house, in the quiet of the night. Because that's when my daughter finally told me the truth about the man she almost married, and I realized the danger she had escaped was far greater than I could have ever imagined. Later that night, long after Carol had gone to bed, I found Chloe sitting on the edge of the bed in her old childhood room. The angry buzzing of the phones had stopped. The house was quiet. She was just staring at the wall, wrapped in a blanket, looking small and lost in the room that had once been her whole world. I sat down beside her on the patchwork quilt I had made for her 16th birthday. For a long time we didn't speak. Then, her voice soft in the darkness, she said, "It wasn't just for you, Mom." I waited, giving her the space to continue. When I saw him, she said, her voice hollow. When I saw the look on his face when he screamed at you, the pure hatred over something as small as a gift, it was like a mask fell off. And for 1 second I saw our entire future. She took a shaky breath. I saw him screaming at me like that. For burning the dinner. For being 5 minutes late. For getting wrinkles, for gaining weight. I saw a man who is completely incapable of loving anything he can't completely control. I saw a man whose love was conditional on my perfect obedience. The cold, hard honesty of her words chilled me more than Ethan's shouting had. When he insulted you, she continued, finally turning to look at me, her eyes clear and full of a terrible new wisdom. He was insulting the person who taught me to be strong. The person who taught me to be independent. And I understood. His plan was never to build a life with me. His plan was to dismantle mine. He needed to isolate me, to tear down my pillars of support, one by one, starting with you, until he was the only person I had left. My own breath hitched. Because I had seen it. I had felt it, but I had never put it into words. The guilt I had been carrying all night threatened to swallow me whole. I saw it. I confessed, my voice a guilty whisper. I saw the little things. The way he dismissed you, the way he subtly put you down. But I didn't want to be that mother. The one who interferes, who ruins her daughter's happiness. I was so afraid of pushing you away that I stayed silent. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I should have said something. She reached out and took my hand. Her hand was cold, but her grip was firm. No, Mom, she said, shaking her head. It's not your fault. If you had said something, I wouldn't have listened. I couldn't have. I was in love with the fantasy he was selling, not the man he actually was. And then, as if a dam had finally broken, she started to talk. She told me everything. She told me about the time he'd joked, in front of his friends, that her art history degree was a waste of money, leaving her feeling stupid and small. She told me how he'd slowly, skillfully, created distance between her and two of her closest college friends, subtly pointing out their flaws until Chloe started to pull away from them. She told me about the countless times he'd criticized her choices. The dress she loved was a little cheap-looking. The book club she adored was silly. Her dream of opening a small pottery studio someday was a nice little hobby, but not a real career. They were 1,000 tiny cuts. Microaggressions she had excused as him just being honest, or constructive criticism. But now, in the harsh, ugly light of what had happened at the wedding, she saw them for what they were. They weren't cuts. They were the methodical, patient work of a man building a cage around her, bar by invisible bar. They were the warning signs she had chosen to ignore. The red flags she had convinced herself were white. I listened, my heart breaking with every word, because I remembered each incident. I remembered forcing a smile while my gut screamed in protest. We weren't discovering anything new. We were just finally calling it by its real name. Emotional abuse. Realizing the truth is one thing, but acting on it, truly dismantling the life you thought you were building, is another thing entirely. The sun would rise in a few hours on a completely new world, and we knew as we sat there in the dark, that we had to be ready to face it, one painful piece at a time. The next morning the sun rose over Austin, but it felt like the first day of a new era. The air in the house was different. It was heavy with exhaustion, yes, but it was also clean, cleared of the toxic cloud we hadn't even realized we were living under. Carol was already in the kitchen, a pot of coffee brewing, a notepad and pen sitting in the middle of the table. She was our general, ready with a battle plan. All right, she said as Chloe and I sat down, her tone all business. Let's make a list. Let's dismantle this thing. Chloe took a deep breath, her face pale but determined. She picked up her phone, the same device that had been a source of such pain the night before, and turned it into a tool of liberation. First on the list, the honeymoon. A 2-week luxury trip to Hawaii. She found the number for the travel agency. When the agent answered, Chloe's voice was clear and steady. There was no hesitation, no hint of the broken woman from the night before. Hello, I'm calling to cancel a reservation under the name Chloe Thompson and Ethan Davison, she said. She gave the details calmly. There was a pause. Reason for cancellation? The wedding did not proceed. She didn't offer any more explanation. She didn't need to. I watched, amazed, as a woman I hadn't seen before emerged from the ashes of the abandoned bride. Next she called the photographer, then the caterer, then the florist. Each call was another nail in the coffin of her old life, and with every nail she hammered in, she stood a little taller. Then came the harder part. The apartment they had bought together, the one they had spent months renovating. That was their shared future. A physical space filled with plans and dreams. "We sell it," Chloe said, looking at me and Carol. "I don't want to set foot in there ever again." She called the real estate agent. She scheduled the movers to pack up her personal belongings. She was methodical, efficient, and ruthless in cutting the strings that tied her to him. Later that afternoon, the three of us went up to her old room. The wedding dress was still on the floor where it had fallen, a crumpled heap of white silk. It looked so sad, so out of place. Together we picked it up. It was heavy, weighted down with broken promises. We didn't rip it. We didn't burn it. With a strange, solemn care, we folded it neatly and placed it in a large box. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of closure. "It's a part of the story," Chloe said softly as we taped the box shut. "A reminder of the day I chose myself over a pretty fantasy." We stored the box in the back of a closet, out of sight. That evening, exhausted but united, we were sitting in the living room when Chloe's phone buzzed with an email. It was a notification from their joint bank account. She opened it. Her face hardened. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. She showed me the phone. Ethan had completely emptied their joint account. Every single penny, including the substantial amount of money Chloe had put in from her own savings for furniture and deposits, was gone. It was over $10,000. We had thought, after the public shaming, that he and his family would crawl into a hole and disappear. We were wrong. This was a clear message. This wasn't over. They were coming after her, and they were going to play dirty. The fight for her freedom had just entered a new, uglier phase. The bank account was a low blow, a petty act of theft designed to hurt and inconvenience her. Chloe, with Carol's help, filed a report, but we knew it would be a long, drawn-out battle. It was a clear sign that Ethan and his family weren't going to let this go. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about winning. Weeks turned into months. Life began to find a new, quieter rhythm. Chloe moved back into her old room in my house. At first it felt like a retreat, a step backward. But soon it began to feel like a reclamation. She started spending time in the garage, where her old pottery will have been gathering dust for years. I'd hear the soft whir of the wheel late at night, and I knew she was healing, shaping her pain into something new, something beautiful. The story of the wedding, thanks to the video, had made Chloe something of a local legend. She used that unexpected attention for good, giving an interview to a local news blog not to trash Ethan, but to talk about the subtle signs of emotional abuse. She directed people to a local women's shelter, and a fundraiser she started online raised thousands of dollars. We thought things were finally settling down. We thought we had weathered the storm. Then the letter arrived. It was a thick, formal envelope from a high-priced law firm in downtown Austin. It was addressed to both of us. My hands trembled as I opened it. They were suing us. Ethan and his family were suing me and Chloe for the full cost of the wedding. The lawsuit was a work of fiction, claiming we had engaged in a premeditated conspiracy to cause emotional distress and financial damages. It painted Chloe as an unstable bride and me as the manipulative puppet master. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the final paragraph. They stated their intention to seek damages far beyond the cost of the wedding. And they specifically mentioned their plan to place a lien on my house, the home I had lived in for 40 years, the home I had raised my daughter in, the home that was nearly paid off, but which I had taken out a small second mortgage on to help with the wedding costs, a fact they had clearly discovered. They were trying to take my home. For the first time since that horrible night, I felt true gut-wrenching fear. This was my sanctuary, my life's work. The thought of losing it was unbearable. I felt the fight go out of me. "Maybe we should just pay them," I whispered, the legal papers shaking in my hand. Chloe took the papers from me. She read them, her face grim. Then she looked at me and her eyes were like steel. "No," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "No. We are not giving them another dime. We are not giving them another second of our fear." What happened next was something I can only describe as a miracle, born from the community of strangers who had supported us. Chloe posted a picture of the lawsuit papers in an online support group for women she had connected with. The story of the lawsuit was picked up by the same news blog that had interviewed her before. 2 days later, she got a call. It was from one of the most respected, powerful female lawyers in the state of Texas. She had seen the story. She was a champion for women's rights, specializing in cases of domestic and emotional abuse. "I read your story and I saw that lawsuit," she told Chloe over the phone. "That's not just a lawsuit, that's a continuation of the abuse. It's a tactic of intimidation, and we are not going to let them get away with it. My firm will represent you and your mother, pro bono." The court battle was short and brutal. Ethan's family's case, built on lies, crumbled under the slightest scrutiny. The video was played in court. Their own fabricated Facebook post was used against them. The judge threw the case out, calling it frivolous and malicious. He even ordered them to pay our legal fees, which our lawyer immediately donated to the women's shelter. It was a total, complete, and utter victory. Today, a year later, life is unrecognizably beautiful. Chloe's pottery studio, born from the ashes of her broken heart, is thriving. It's a bright, beautiful space filled with light and creativity. My home is safe. It's filled with laughter again. Our relationship, always strong, is now unbreakable, forged in the fire of that terrible night. The dream of a perfect wedding shattered, yes, but it was replaced by something so much more real and valuable. My daughter's freedom, her happiness, and the profound, unshakable knowledge that true love, the kind that defends, protects, and empowers, will always, always win. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I know I'm not the only one who has faced a battle like this. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your dignity against the people who were supposed to love you most, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we are not alone. And if you'd like to hear more stories of strength and survival, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. You never know whose life you might change.